In 2023, Americans ate roughly 50 billion hamburgers. That is 150 burgers for every single person in the country. Men, women, children, vegetarians average it all out, and that is what you get. But here's what almost nobody knows. The hamburger is not American. The people who made it famous were not American. And the story of how it went from a poor immigrant street food to the global symbol of American power is one of the most surprising journeys in food history. This is the hidden history of the hamburger. To find where the hamburger actually comes from, you need to go back to the 13th century. When the Mongol Empire swept across Central Asia, soldiers under Genghis Khan were riding for weeks at a time without stopping. They needed food that was portable, high in protein, and required no cooking. So they developed a simple solution. They placed raw scraps of meat under their saddles and rode on it all day. The pressure and movement tenderized the meat. By the time they stopped, they had something soft enough to eat raw. That technique, believe it or not, is what eventually became the hamburger. As Mongol trade routes expanded westward, the practice of eating finely minced raw beef spread into Russia and Eastern Europe. By the 17th century, German sailors trading in the Baltic ports began picking up this idea. They called the dish tartar, named after the Tartars, the Mongol and Turkic peoples who had popularized it, but it was in the port city of Hamburg, Germany, where everything changed. Hamburg was one of the busiest ports in Europe. Ships carrying workers, merchants, and immigrants passed through constantly. The city needed cheap, fast food that could feed people on the move. Local cooks started shaping minced beef into flat patties, lightly seasoning them, and cooking them quickly in a pan. They called it the Hamburg steak. It was not prestigious. It was not served in fine restaurants. It was the food of sailors, dock workers, and people who could not afford anything better. And then came the Great Migration. Between 1820 and 1900, over 5 million Germans emigrated to the United States. They were the largest immigrant group in American history during that period, and they brought their food with them. Hamburg steak arrived in America inside the pockets of poor immigrants looking for a better life. It landed in New York, in Chicago, in St. Louis, and it immediately found an audience. The exact moment the Hamburg steak became the hamburger served in a bun is one of the most fiercely debated questions in American food history. At least 5 different families claim to have invented it. There is Charlie Negreen, who reportedly sold meat between 2 slices of bread at a Wisconsin county fair in 1885. There are the Minced brothers, who claim they ran out of pork sausage at an Ohio fair that same year and substituted beef. But the claim with the most historical documentation comes from New Haven, Connecticut. In 1900, a Danish immigrant named Louis Lassen was running a small lunch wagon. A customer came in a hurry and asked for something quick. Lassen slapped a beef patty between 2 slices of toast and handed it over. Louis's lunch restaurant still exists today. They still use the same cast iron broilers from 1898, and they still refuse to put ketchup on their burgers. The bun was where the hamburger truly became American. You could hold it with one hand. You could eat it standing up. You did not need a plate or silverware. For a country that was increasingly mobile, increasingly industrialized, and increasingly in a hurry, a burger in a bun was perfect. By the early 1900s, hamburger stands were popping up at fairgrounds, baseball stadiums, and street corners across the country. But they were still associated with poor quality meat, and that was a serious problem. In 1906, Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, a novel about conditions inside Chicago meatpacking plants. He described meat processed in filthy conditions, contaminated with rat droppings, and laced with chemicals to disguise spoilage. The public was horrified. Meat sales dropped overnight. The hamburger, already linked to low-grade scraps, took a massive hit to its reputation. For decades, the hamburger struggled. But one man changed everything. And in doing so, he accidentally built the stage for the most powerful food company in history. In 1921, a short-order cook named Walter Anderson and a businessman named Billy Ingram opened a small hamburger stand in Wichita, Kansas. They called it White Castle. The name was deliberate. White meant cleanliness. Castle meant strength and permanence. Everything about the design was calculated to erase the hamburger's dirty reputation. The buildings were made of white porcelain enamel. The staff wore white uniforms. The kitchens were open so customers could watch their food being prepared. Ingram understood something critical. Trust is built through transparency. White Castle standardized everything. Same size patties, same cooking time, same price at every location. For a nickel, you got a small, square burger with holes punched through it so it cooked faster. It worked. White Castle proved that fast food could be clean, consistent, and profitable, but it took a different kind of man, an obsessive, relentless, borderline ruthless businessman, to take that concept and turn it into something that would reshape the entire world. In 1954, a milkshake machine salesman named Ray Kroc drove to San Bernardino, California, to visit a small hamburger restaurant that had ordered 8 of his machines. Most restaurants ordered 1 or 2. 8 meant this place was doing extraordinary volume. He had to see it for himself. The restaurant was run by 2 brothers, Richard and Maurice McDonald. What Kroc found when he arrived stopped him cold. The McDonald brothers had designed their kitchen like a factory floor. Every worker had one specific job. One person made fries, one person made burgers, one person handled the grill. There were no waitresses, no china plates, no menu with 30 options. Customers walked up to a window, ordered from a limited menu, and received their food in under 60 seconds. The brothers had eliminated every variable. The same burger came out the same way every single time. Kroc later said it was the most efficient food operation he had ever seen in his life. He approached the brothers about expanding. They were hesitant. They were comfortable, making good money, and did not want the stress of more locations. But Kroc was relentless. He negotiated the rights to franchise their system. In 1955, Kroc opened his first McDonald's franchise in Des Plaines, Illinois. Then, he did something the McDonald brothers never imagined. He turned the franchise system itself into the business. Kroc did not just sell burgers, he sold real estate. McDonald's would buy land, build the restaurant, and lease it back to franchisees at a markup. The franchisee paid rent to McDonald's whether they sold 1,000 burgers or 1,000,000. Kroc later said his business was not the restaurant business, it was the real estate business. By 1961, Kroc had bought out the McDonald brothers entirely for $2.7 million. Richard and Maurice each walked away with about $1 million after taxes. They were satisfied. Kroc was not satisfied at all. He demanded absolute uniformity across every location. The thickness of the patty was specified down to the fraction of an inch, the temperature of the fry oil, the exact amount of ketchup on each burger. Everything was documented, measured, and enforced. By 1970, there were over 1,500 McDonald's locations across the United States. By 1980, McDonald's was operating in over 30 countries. The hamburger had gone global. But as McDonald's expanded, something was happening beneath the surface. To feed millions of hamburgers every single day, McDonald's needed beef, enormous quantities of it, and they needed it cheap. The pressure they put on the beef supply chain was unlike anything the agricultural industry had ever experienced. Small, independent cattle ranchers who had supplied local butchers for generations found themselves unable to compete with the prices that industrial meatpacking companies could offer. Over the following decades, the American cattle industry consolidated dramatically. By the 1990s, just 4 companies controlled over 80% of the beef processing in the entire United States. The industrial feedlot system that emerged was radically different from traditional cattle ranching. Animals were packed into massive confined operations, fed grain instead of grass, and processed at a speed that would have been unimaginable 50 years earlier. The consequences were serious. Overcrowded conditions allowed bacteria like E. coli to spread rapidly through the food supply. In 1993, contaminated hamburger patties from Jack in the Box restaurants caused one of the worst food poisoning outbreaks in American history. Over 700 people were sickened. 4 children died. The investigation that followed revealed that the beef industry's safety standards were dangerously inadequate, and that regulators had known about the risks for years. At the same time, fast food was reshaping the American body itself, as burgers became the default cheap meal available everywhere. At all hours, calorie consumption climbed. Portion sizes grew. The average American hamburger in 1950 weighed about 1.5 ounces. By the 1990s, the average fast food burger had tripled in size. In 2001, journalist Eric Schlosser published Fast Food Nation, documenting the industrial food system that fast food had helped create. The book became a bestseller. It sparked a national conversation about what was actually inside the food that hundreds of millions of people were eating every single day. The hamburger, once a humble immigrant street food eaten by dock workers in Hamburg, had become the center of one of the most consequential public health debates in modern American history. Today, The hamburger is still the most consumed food item in the United States. It is sold on every continent. It is available in luxury restaurants for $40 and at drive-thrus for $1.29. The story of how it got here, from Mongol horsemen to German ports to immigrant lunch wagons to the most recognized food corporation on earth, is a story that most people eating a burger today have never thought about for a single second. A poor immigrant's cheap street food became the symbol of American power, American efficiency, and American excess all at once. And it is sitting in a paper wrapper somewhere within a few miles of wherever you are right now. If this video surprised you, subscribe. Every week we go deeper into the hidden histories behind the everyday things you take for granted. The next one might change how you look at something you thought you already understood.